There are 7 Sabbaths that are counted, leading up to the feast known as the Feast of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came down in the book of Acts, and also where the Torah was originally given in the time of Moses. And what I find interesting about the counting of the Omer is the phrase that we see over and over and over again in our New Testament regarding the disciples meeting on the first day of the week. Is that really true? Were they all meeting on Sunday? I think not. There was a blog that I did a while back called Satan Sabotaging the Sabbaton, and you can check that out at babylonrisingblog.com/Sabbaton.html, and Sabbaton is spelled Sabbaton. Sabbaton. If you want to put the link in the chat room if you're interested in checking that out. Because as I started doing Sabbath, keeping Sabbath, so my well-meaning Christian brothers and sisters started coming after me and saying, oh, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, which of course is true. And we meet on Sunday, we don't meet on Saturday anymore. Sunday effectively replaced Saturday as the new Sabbath, so to speak. And they would often point to scriptures like Acts 20, verse 7, which we'll get to in a minute. But when they were doing that and challenging me on these things, I'm like, I'm really thinking, God made a point. That's the only commandment of the 10 Commandments. He says, remember. He didn't say forget or change or wait till my son shows up and I'll, switch it to another day. He said, no, this is the day, the seventh day, is the day of rest from the time of creation and forever. It is the day that Yahuwah himself set apart as the sanctified, holy Sabbath or day of rest. And it was to be forever, perpetual, in your generations, over and over and over again. We see that it's everlasting, not that it was going to change. And so I decided to look up Acts 20, verse 7, and I looked at my trusty King James Study Bible and saw that the word day was in italics. And I thought, because I know that whenever I see the italicized words, that's where the translator inserted something that, was not in the text to begin with. So I began to look into it deeper. I had never really looked into it before, but I went to Bible.cc as one of my favorite online resources to look up the Hebrew and Greek that underlies our English translations, and it also has a good parallel Bible resource there. So I look it up, and I saw, most of the English translations said first day of the week, but there were some that said something different. And that's what caused me to look deeper, so I looked into the Greek, and I saw, sure enough, the word first that is translated to first is there. It's a Greek word, Strong's number 1520. Day is not there. That is inserted by the English translators. And where it says week, I see that the Greek word there is Strong's 4521, which is Sabbaton, which everywhere else is translated as Sabbath. So I'm going, okay, there's something going on here, and I got to look into it. So I looked up all of the different places in the New Testament. I forgot how many there were, like 6 of them or something like that. A number of places in the New Testament where it says the disciples were meeting on the first day of the week. So, and in every case, the word day is inserted, and the word week is bogusly translated from the word Sabbaton, which is everywhere else translated as Sabbath. So, but then I started wondering, after I wrote that blog and everything, and came to the conclusion that something's up with our translations. Now, either it was intentional or people that were well-meaning just didn't understand what was being said there. And I'm not sure which. I am naturally conspiracy-minded, and when I look at characters like Marcion and Constantine and a whole lot of others that tried to do everything they possibly could to divorce us from the Hebrew Scriptures, when I look at those kind of characters, I think, maybe it was intentional, but I don't know. Whatever the case may be, something's up. So, but I was trying to figure out why would they, other than trying to just get us off God's page, would there be another reason for it? Could it be that they just didn't understand what was being said there? And so that's what prompted me to look a little deeper, because we just finished Passover and the days of unleavened bread and first fruits and all that. And we had a Holy Convocation, what was it, Monday or Tuesday, whatever it was, earlier this week, the closing day of unleavened bread. And it caused me to go back and look at these scriptures again. And so when I came back, I wrote this, what I'm going to read right now, yesterday. First day of the week or first of the Sabbaths. Before understanding the Feast of Yahuwah, I was just as clueless as the next guy concerning the things of God and how his plan/calendar works. Now, I'm still learning and certainly don't have it all figured out yet. But one thing I have figured out is that someone really started messing with our Bible and changing the Sabbath. We are now in the season of counting the Omer, leading up to Pentecost. Without an understanding of the feast, specifically the counting of the Omer, people have no clue what first day of the week means in their Bible. I certainly didn't. Like most, I thought it was talking about Sunday, and for good reason. Someone jacked with the text, big time. Take Acts 20, verse 7, for instance. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. And I'm going to post the link in the chat room for anybody who cares to look at the Greek pictures that I've got there. You should be able to click on that link right there. And go ahead and scroll down to that first picture you see, and it shows a screen capture from Bible.cc showing all the Greek in that verse. And you'll see what I was talking about earlier. Now, note, the word day is not in the text. It is inserted either by ignorant translators or by those with an agenda. I suspect the latter. In the the word week is a bogus translation for Sabbaton. Over and over and over again, Sabbaton is the word for Sabbath and never for week in normal Greek. And if you go to the link there that I posted in the chat room earlier, the Satan sabotaging the Sabbaton, you'll see what I was talking about. You can go to any translation software you can find online or whatever, and just punch in first day of the week or something like that, and you'll see that any translator will not use the word Sabbaton in the Greek for the English word week. And just to confirm that I wasn't crazy or that I wasn't doing something right, I called a friend of mine up who grew up in Greece, speaks Greek fluently. He's not one of these guys that learned it in seminary or whatever or as a second language. He grew up speaking Greek, learned English as his second language. So I asked him, I said, hey, Peter, if I was to say, hey, let's get together next week, or if I was to say, we met on the first day of the week, and I use different examples, how would you say, what would be the Greek word for week? And it was hebdoma or something like that. I forget exactly what it was, but it was not Sabbaton. And so when I asked him, I said, well, if I said to you, what does Sabbaton mean in Greek? He said, well, that's Sabbath. I'm like, okay, so then why is it over and over and over again in the Bible translated first day of the week? And he went and looked at it. He says, that's messed up. It shouldn't be that way. And he's right. It shouldn't be that way. So I'll continue with what I wrote yesterday. After first fruits, we begin a 7-week count of Sabbaths toward Pentecost. Hence, Yeshua rose on or just before first fruits at the beginning of that count of Sabbaths. Now, first fruits is, in fact, on a Sunday. But you'll note that Yeshua, said over and over and over again that he would raise on the third day. He would be dead 3 days and 3 nights, but he would raise on the third day. And I got to thinking about that. If 3 days and 3 nights equals a total of 24 hours times 3, 72 hours, he died at 3 p.m., I believe, on a Wednesday. It is very likely that he was up shortly after 3 p.m. on Saturday, but before the end of the Sabbath day, the weekly Sabbath that Saturday, which would have been, at somewhere as the sun's going down. So it appears that he was actually up and awake out of the tomb before Sunday began. Now, I know there's disagree and say that he rose on first fruits on Sunday, and that very well could be. I mean, I've said it myself that he rose on first fruits. Maybe it was right on the line. I don't know. The only way I can reconcile him saying that he will raise on the third day is that if he had to have rose still on the Sabbath, and then walked out on first fruits on Sunday. I don't know. I don't know how it works exactly. I'm still trying to figure this out myself, but these are just some of the thoughts I've had as I'm speaking out loud here. Now, if you look at Matthew 28, verse 1, you'll see in the King James, in the end of and I put in parentheses there, weekly Sabbath, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And if you've got that link pulled up there on Facebook, you see the Greek text there. You see the word Sabbaton is used twice, correctly at the beginning of Matthew 28:1, in the end of the Sabbath, that comes from Sabbaton, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, no, that's where the is inserted and day is inserted, and Sabbaton is bogusly translated as week. And I've got that highlighted there in the picture. Now, while it is true that the first day of the week follows the Sabbath, we could find a far better and much more accurate translation of that particular scripture in the Jubilee Bible. That's another English translation. It says in Matthew 28:1, "Now, well along on the Sabbath, as it began to dawn on the first of the Sabbaths, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre." And I think that's a great translation right there, because the word for first or one is, in fact, there in the Greek. So it appears to be saying that it's a particular type of Sabbath. What could it be? Well, I came to the conclusion that it's the first of the 7 Sabbaths that you count. They are counted as you head toward Pentecost, which indeed would be true. He rose after the last of the Sabbaths that precede the specific counting of 7 Sabbaths leading up Pentecost. The same is true for Acts 27, but let's back up to verse 6 for the context. Now, the whole thing started for me with somebody giving me Acts 20, verse 7. But again, context is everything, so I went back and looked at it, looked at the previous verses and the ones that came after it. But verse 6, the one immediately preceding verse 7, gives us a pretty tremendous clue of what's going on here. Paul says, and we sailed, or Luke, I guess, writing this, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. So it says, he's saying, after unleavened bread ends, and you got first fruits right in there, it took them 5 days to get to someplace, to Troas. And now 5 days, of course, is less than a week. So they got there before the next Sabbath, and when they were there, they spent a total of 7 days while they're there. But he goes back and then it says, and upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. Here we see that they concluded the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and in less than a week, they arrived in Troas, apparently in time to celebrate the first of the 7 Sabbaths that are counted leading up to Pentecost. Again, the Jubilee Bible blows the King James out of the water with a far more accurate rendition of the Greek. It says in Acts 20, verse 6 and 7, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. And the first of the Sabbaths, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart the next day, and continued his word until midnight.
And if we need more proof that this is true, we see in verse 16. For Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus, because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. To me, this is absolute proof that the first Sabbath of Acts 20, verse 7, is a reference to the first of 7 which are counted leading up to Pentecost, which Paul earnestly desired to keep. See what I'm saying here? It clearly establishes in verse 6 that they're in the days after unleavened bread, but they're before Pentecost. That is the only time when Sabbaths are actually counted. And Paul was doing both. That's right. Paul was a feast keeper as well as a Sabbath keeper. And he said that we should imitate him as he imitated Christ. 1 Corinthians 11:1.
Look, I'm still searching this stuff out myself, guys. And as I continue to do so, I become more and more convinced that Yahuwah has not changed his mind concerning or about his commandments, including the Sabbath, which we are told to remember, not forget, dis, and or change.